You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. And on today's episode, we're reviewing the test series between Sri Lanka and Australia. For the first time since 2011, Australia are once again victorious in Sri Lanka. A 2-0 series victory is a fair reflection of how well they played. They dominated Sri Lanka in their own backyard. Outstanding performances from Khawaja, Smith, Carey, Inglis, Lyon and Kuhneman, plus a great team performance contributed to this series victory. Sri Lanka were disappointing throughout the series. They were completely outplayed in all three departments. A 2-0 series defeat reflects that. And when Sri Lanka look back on the series, the missed opportunities, the poor batting and bowling cost them dearly. If they took those chances and batted and bowled better, it could have been a different result. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be. And it was a very disappointing result for Sri Lanka, it had to be said. And everyone has said that in terms of their comments and what they've took out of this test series between Sri Lanka and Australia. No doubt it was a one-sided series. Australia clearly the better side. It's very unusual to see teams that are not from the subcontinent come to the subcontinent and dominate in the way that Australia did. But also you have to look at what New Zealand did when they won against India last year 3-0. So, you know, teams are starting to find a way in a formula to win in the subcontinent, which is fantastic, despite the challenges it possesses. And we saw that from Australia in this test series against Sri Lanka. They were by far the better team. Sri Lanka were outclassed in every department, and that will be the disappointing factor for them. So plenty to talk about in today's episode as we look back on the series and talk about Sri Lanka and Australia. Where did it go right? Where did it go wrong? And just reflect on the series and how Australia went on to win 2-0 in Sri Lanka for the first time since 2011. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. First of all, before we do that, before we talk about both Sri Lanka and Australia's performance in this test series, we'll have a look back at how the test series panned out in terms of the results from the two test matches. We'll start with the first test, and it was played in Galle at the International Stadium. Australia won the first test by an innings and 242 runs. Usman Khawaja was named player of the match for his double century. And the second and final test was also played in Galle. To end the series, Australia won by 9 wickets. Alex Carey was named player of the match for his superb century. And Australia won the series 2-0. And Steve Smith was named the player of the series. 200s, excellent captaincy, and just a good all-round performance from Steve Smith and returning to his best, as we've known to accustom from Steve Smith over the years in his illustrious career. So that's pretty much how the test series panned out. 2 very convincing victories by Australia in the end, and Sri Lanka, a couple of very poor performances across the series. Let's talk about Sri Lanka in terms of their performance in this test series against Australia. Talk about how they went about things with the batting side of things and the bowling side of things. You have to say it was a pretty poor series from Sri Lanka. It was very uncompetitive, very one-sided. The batting and bowling performances reflected that. And Sri Lanka were below par. And really, you have to say, they looked like the visiting side that came to Sri Lanka for the first time and didn't know how to play in these conditions, because it just shows you how good and how Australia dominated in these conditions. They looked like they were playing at home compared to Sri Lanka. And it really showed across the 2 test matches in this series. Really for Sri Lanka, they missed opportunities in both test matches with the bat and with the ball. They also dropped catches, which cost them dearly, especially in that first test. Dhananjaya De Silva's captaincy was left to be desired. He was pretty poor across the series with his captaincy in terms of tactics and also his own personal form with the bat. He was really poor with the batting side of things. some very ordinary dismissals from De Silva across the series. So his captaincy was poor. The missed opportunities in the first test, they dropped catches, obviously. Pradap Jayasuriya dropped Smith on 1 after he made his 10,000th run. Kusal Mendes dropped Khawaja on 90. And then obviously he went on to make 232. The missed opportunities with the DRS reviews in the first test. Head should have been out, LBW, didn't review it. Khawaja should have been out. He nicked one, which was caught by Kusal Mendes behind the stumps. Didn't review it, Sri Lanka. So stuff like that, missed opportunities, really cost Sri Lanka dearly in this series. The batting side of things, you would think that Dinesh Chandimal and probably Kusal Mendes were probably the two best batters for Sri Lanka in the series. And when you have a look at the stats in the series, both of them scored over 150 runs plus and scored 2 half centuries for the series. Angela Matthews batted well in the second test, but apart from that, he didn't really do much, really. So you'll probably have to say that Chandimal and Mendes, Kusal Mendes, were probably Sri Lanka's best batters in the series. The rest of the other batters were poor. De Silva, we mentioned, he was underwhelming. Kamindu Mendes, who's had a brilliant start to his very young test career, was very poor in the series. Very poor dismissals, and he's got a long way to go, the youngster, in terms of how to bat in test cricket. After a very good start, things are just starting to go a little bit downhill for him, and we saw that in the series. Dimith Kurakna was not at his best, obviously retired after the second test, playing his 100th and final test match of the series, and also for his career, announcing his retirement. Obviously, he's been in decline for some time. Papan Nasanka and Osada Fernando played one test in the series. Both of them were disappointing when they batted. So Sri Lanka's batting wasn't really up to it, really. The first test match was poor. They lost 15 wickets on day 4. After following on, they lost 5 for 9 at one stage when they lost those 15 wickets on day 4. Chandimal was dismissed by Nathan Lyon twice on the same day in the same session. So if that happens, which is a bit of a rarity in test cricket for a batter, if that happens, then you know that you've had a pretty bad day with the bat. And Sri Lanka did in that first test. They lost 15 wickets. They were chasing 654 that Australia set in the first innings of that first test. They were very behind the game. A batting collapse like that was bound to happen. The second test match, yet again, there was another batting collapse. They lost 4 for 57 in the second session on day 1 after being 1 for 93. And then they were all out for 257 after winning the toss. So that was another missed opportunity for Sri Lanka to really put Australia under pressure. And they blew it because of that poor batting performance again and another batting collapse, which was very disappointing. So it just shows, how poorly Sri Lanka batted in the series. There was no partnerships. No one scored 100. The top scorer in the series was Kusal Mendes with 85 not out. And that came in the first innings of the second test. So that was pretty poor. No hundreds, no big scores compared to the Australian side where, Smith, Khawaja and Inglis and Carey scored hundreds. Sri Lanka didn't do that with their batting. There wasn't any consistency in the batting. There were lack of partnerships as well, and big partnerships. So it was really disappointing across the board for Sri Lanka with their batting in the series. And they've got a lot of work to do in terms of trying to bat better in these conditions at home. And they'll be very disappointed about their batting performance. The bowling performance, on the other hand, was pretty poor as well. The Sri Lankan spinners lacked consistency throughout the series and couldn't build pressure. In the first test, the spinners conceded over 150 runs each. That was Pradap Jayasuriya, Perez, and Van der Sar. And when you have a look at their stats in the series in terms of averages and that, they're quite high. It just shows you that they didn't have that consistency and didn't build pressure. In the second test, they were able to take 7 wickets for 64. Australia had a batting collapse in that first innings of the second test. Pradap Jayasuriya took 5 wickets, but really it was all too late for Sri Lanka. Australia were in a dominant position, leading by 157. Carey and Smith in that partnership took the game away from Sri Lanka, so it was too late. So that was a disappointing thing for Sri Lanka, is that the spinners weren't really building pressure or being consistent. They would bowl some good deliveries from time to time, but then other times they will bowl some absolute rubbish and got carded for runs. So as a spinner, you've got to build that consistency. And especially here on these conditions in Sri Lanka, where the ball's turning, especially in the second test, where the pitch turned a bit more than the first test, you've got to build that pressure, and they didn't do that. Pradap Jayasuriya was poor. He was underwhelming. Nishan Perez, took some wickets, but in the first test, he was really poor. Ramesh Mendes, he was poor for the one game that he played. Probably their best spin bowler only played one test, and that was Jeffrey Van der Sey. He bowled some very good leg spin in the first test, took 3 wickets, and he was dropped. He was probably Sri Lanka's best bowler in terms of the spin department. And then you have the Sri Lankan seamers, Asita Fernando in the first test, and then obviously Kumara in the second test. Both of them wicketless, both of them ineffective, and they were very poor when they had the opportunity to bowl, and they leaked runs and they weren't consistent and didn't build pressure. So, it was just a pretty poor bowling performance across the series for Sri Lanka. The spinners didn't build consistency. They lacked consistency, couldn't build pressure like the Australian spinners did so well. Lyon and Kuderman built the pressure, were consistent for long periods of time and got the results and got the wickets. Unfortunately for Sri Lanka, they weren't able to do that. And the batting, very poor as well. So very underwhelming performance from Sri Lanka with both bat and ball across the 2 test matches. They'll be very disappointed with their outcome in this series. To lose 2-0, I think that's a fair reflection on how poorly they played in the series. And they've got a lot of work to do. Dimith Kuraratne's retired now. Angelo Matthews is probably going to retire soon. Chandimal is getting towards the end of his career. Dhananjaya De Silva's, sort of getting towards that point in his career where, he's got to think about his long-term future. So Sri Lanka are going to go through some transition and changes of their test side and players. And obviously this series against Australia has really highlighted the problems with their test cricket at the moment. Their batting is poor, their bowling is poor, their all-round game is poor, and they need to try and improve that going forward. So to finish off about Sri Lanka, very poor performance, and a 2-0 series result sort of reflects their poor performance across the 2 test matches of this series. Now then, let's talk about Australia and talk about Australia's performance in this test series against Sri Lanka. It was a very dominant performance by Australia. 2-0 series victory reflects that. They outclassed Sri Lanka in their own backyard. They batted and bowled well with ease in these conditions. And I think that was very, very impressive, is that the Australian team definitely outclassed Sri Lanka in their home conditions, which is not what you associate from teams like Australia that go to the subcontinent and don't dominate. I think for Australia, that's why this series is so pleasing, is because they did dominate and they were able to find a way to win the series. Terrific performances from Khawaja, Smith, Carey, and Inglis with the bat. Travis Head as opener was different, added a different dynamic. The bowling was superb. Kuhneman, Lyon, Mitchell Starc, and then obviously you had the part-timers in Webster and Head taking wickets. Obviously Todd Murphy only played the 1 test and took a wicket, but it was a good all-round performance by Australia and thoroughly deserved to win 2-0. The batting side of things, they handled the spinning conditions well. The batters, they had their plans. We saw from Usman Khawaja playing the reverse sweep to good effect. Same with Alex Carey, whereas Smith was playing well from the crease, going forward and back, using the feet. Same with Josh Inglis. Travis Head was going to be aggressive. That's his game plan. And we know that from Travis Head, and that worked very well in the series, even though he didn't make big runs, but to have an impact opening the batting, to really put Sri Lanka under pressure, did really make an impact in the series, really. Marnus Labuschagne was disappointed, but about his series. But what we saw in the second innings of the second test, Marnus started to look good. Used his feet, was looking to be aggressive, whereas in the other innings of this series, he wasn't like that. So it was a pretty good game plan from Australia in terms of their batting, using their feet, playing the reverse and the conventional sweep. They rotated the strike well. They built partnerships. They had big partnerships. Obviously, Khawaja and Smith in the first test was over 250. Same with Smith and Carey in the second test, over 250. Josh Inglis had a pretty good partnership with Usman Khawaja, which was over 150. Just building big partnerships. And that's why they were able to score big scores, 650 odd in the first test, 414 in the second test. Scoring big runs and really putting the opposition under pressure was a good result for Australia in the series. Steve Smith, what can you say about him? Back to his best, 200s, player of the series, over 10,000 test runs, 200 catches as a fielder. His captaincy was superb in the series, returning back to his best. Usman Khawaja was outstanding in that first test, came into the series under pressure. He scored that 200, his first ever double century in his career. Probably one of the most memorable innings that he will probably play in his test career, Usman Khawaja. He tends to play his best innings in Asia. And certainly this was one of the best, really. To go with the 100 that he scored in 2018 in that test match in Dubai against Pakistan, this is probably right up there in terms of the double century against Sri Lanka. Alex Carey was pretty good. That superb 100 in the second test, the partnership with Smith. I thought his wicket-keeping was very good throughout the whole series, Carey. He kept well, he batted well. Josh Inglis scoring that century on debut. He looked at ease, batting in a test match for Australia. To do that, to score 100 on debut. He missed out in the second test, got out for a duck. But to score 100 on debut is a fantastic result for Josh Inglis, who's been around in the squad for some time, has got his opportunity and made the most of it in that first test. Marnus Labuschagne was disappointing. A lot of pressure on Marnus because of his form. But in the second test, to score that 26 not out in the run chase in the second test will definitely give him some confidence going forward. And in that innings, he looked pretty comfortable. He looked pretty good. Unfortunately, that was the end of the series. But Marnus starting to look a bit better than he was compared to the first test and also the first innings of the second test. But he's under pressure still, but he needed those runs in the second innings to really boost his confidence. Travis Head opening the batting was a good move. Obviously, a lot of people said, Sam Constance should have been opening, Head should have been batting at 5. Well, in the subcontinent, you need someone to take on the new ball. That's where it's going to be really dangerous, especially with the spinners. In the subcontinent, the spinners with the new ball are very dangerous. Compare that to the old ball, what we saw in the second test is that the spin is not really prevalent. It's not really threatening once the ball gets older because the seam gets a bit flatter, the ball gets a bit softer. It's not as hard, it's not as pronounced as it was with the new ball and where you're getting that turn and spin. Travis Head was pretty good. The first test really set the tone, added 90-odd runs for the first wicket with Usman Khawaja, and that really set up Australia to get that big score of 650 plus in the first innings. And that's where Australia really took the game away from Sri Lanka. So even though Travis Head didn't score many runs, he only scored 150, highest score of 57, average of 32. It's definitely better than when he came to Sri Lanka 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Travis Head, he only scored 23 runs, highest score of 12, average of 7. And that was when he was batting at number 5. Compare that to this series 3 years later in Sri Lanka, compared to 2022, last time he was in Sri Lanka, much better because he was opening the batting, and that's where Australia, thinks that Travis Head can really do the damage, especially in the subcontinent. So I thought he was pretty good there. The batting was pretty good from Australia, really good in terms of their performance and output. And I think everyone should be very pleased with their performance in the series in terms of the batting side of things. The bowling side of things was really good. I thought the spinners bowled really well. Kuhnemann and Lyon, were outstanding, 16 and 14 wickets respectively for Kuhnemann and Lyon. Mitchell Starc showed his best with a reverse swinging ball, took 6 wickets. He took 2 wickets in consecutive deliveries in the second test to really put Sri Lanka under pressure there. Showed his class with the reverse swing capabilities that he possesses. Also, he has a pretty good record in Sri Lanka. I think he averages 16 when he takes his wickets in Sri Lanka, which is pretty extraordinary. Just shows you how good he is in these conditions. Todd Murphy didn't have much of a role to play. Only played 1 match in the series. Only took a wicket. He didn't play much of a role. Got dropped for the second test for Connolly. Bo Webster and Travis Head with their part-time off-spin was pretty good. They took wickets and they contributed. So it was a really good team effort with the ball for Australia. The noticeable difference was that, they built pressure and consistency. And that's why they were able to get the results and get the wickets. Compare that to the Sri Lankan bowlers and spinners. They weren't able to build that consistency and they weren't able to build up that pressure because of that reason, because they weren't consistent enough. Compared that to the Australian bowlers and spinners, they were consistent. So that's why they got the results. And obviously Nathan Lyon, 550 test wickets, where it all started in Gaul back in 2011. He has a wonderful record here at Gaul. Obviously, first ever test match he played in his career was here on debut, where he got Kumar Sangakkara out first ball and he got 5 wickets. He bowled well. Kuhnemann was probably the standout of the series. And I think Kuhnemann, the left arm spinner, definitely really helped Australia in this series. And he picked up 16 wickets and picked up a fifer in the first test, which was pretty good. So Australia's bowling was pretty good. They've got the formula. They've got a strategy with their bowling that they can really use to effect in the subcontinent. We saw that in this series against Sri Lanka. So a pretty good performance with the ball from Australia. Everyone played their part. The batting side of things, everyone played their part. Everyone found a way to really adapt to the conditions. And that's why they were dominant. And it was a pretty good performance. So I think Australia, reflecting on this series, will be very proud of the fact that they were able to dominate, play with such ease in these conditions with the bat and with the ball, were able to get the better of Sri Lanka in their own backyard. And I think that's the satisfying thing that they will take out of this series, is that knowing that we dominated Sri Lanka in their own backyard and we can play in these conditions and we've got what it takes to win in the subcontinent going forward. So I think Australia will be very pleased with their work in this test series against Sri Lanka. To finish off our review of the test series between Sri Lanka and Australia, some of my final thoughts and observations that I gained from the series. This 2-0 series victory for Australia is probably one of their most dominant in the subcontinent for some time. To dominate in Sri Lanka in their own backyard and to be able to bat and bowl in these conditions with ease is a testament to their preparation beforehand in Dubai, and outstanding performances from Smith, Carey, Khawaja, Inglis, Lyon and Kuhnemann with bat and ball backed up their domination in the series. Sri Lanka were disappointing in this test series. Quite simply, they were outclassed and couldn't match Australia. Missed opportunities mixed in with poor batting and bowling cost them dearly. To lose 2-0 is a fair reflection of how they played in this series. Even though this was a one-sided test series, at times we saw some good cricket from both teams. Australia were by far the better team and deserved their 2-0 series victory. With test cricket potentially introducing promotion and relegation soon, this could be the last test series that Sri Lanka and Australia will ever play. If that's the case, that will be a sad moment, not only for Sri Lanka and Australia, but for world cricket. Thanks everyone for listening to our test series review between Sri Lanka and Australia. If you're watching or listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know your thoughts on this test series between Sri Lanka and Australia in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching and listening, and until next time, keep safe and bye for now.